Good afternoon, Good Shepherd. It's good to be back with you. And coming to you from the beautiful Sonoma Valley, not one of my favorite places to have been. Um, as I said, I'm glad to be back with you. And to answer the question that many people have asked, did I have a nice time away? I enjoyed the upstairs of the house rather than the basement. Um, uh, of course, it wasn't what I had hoped for. I hoped to actually get away, but that was not to be. But I was able to take care of a number of things and get ahead on some other things, mostly housework and stuff like that, and spend some time with family and the dog and bicycling. And so it was all pretty good. And now it's back into the fray as of last Monday. And I want to begin by just thanking the Reverends Anna Horan and Mary Need for taking the service on Sunday. Mary's sermon was wonderful. I listened to it and it was great, very appropriate. And Anna did a fabulous job running the slides and being the efficient. And thank you, great big thank you to Ellen Blackburn for leading the discussion on canoeing the mountains. And if you haven't seen that yet, I think it's probably available online pretty quick. If it isn't there already, I haven't checked. I put off recording this until today. Usually I would have done it yesterday on Wednesday, because I knew that this afternoon the clergy of the diocese were going to have a conversation with the office of the bishop, with the bishop and Canon Alex, about where we will be going. What does reopening look like, if it looks like anything these days? All of this, especially in light of the governor's announcement last Monday about the sort of shift from shelter in place to safer at home. And what does that mean? And how are we going to negotiate the coming weeks and months? So the discussion was good. We did get some guidelines, and we'll spin those out to you a little bit more as time goes on. The slides and the discussion, I think, are going to be made public, and so once that happens, we'll upload those, or at least give you a link so that you can see exactly what the bishop and Canon Alex had to say to us, to the clergy, and where the clergy's questions arose, where they came up, and what kind of response we received from the leadership of the diocese. So I will certainly tell you more about that as I can. I'll make a few comments towards the end. But I'd like to start or do some reflection, I guess is a better way of putting it. This morning, I was reading the book of First Peter. It's in our daily office lectionary, and was set for this morning. And although this may sound a little odd, I was struck by the first verse of the section that I was reading. And First Peter was a letter that most scholars think was written to a group of new Christians, maybe newly baptized Christians, but new Christians in a city or an area where Christianity was certainly not in the majority. These people may have been Gentiles, not Jews, and so they were coming into the Christian world very much new. And the author begins this chapter, this section, by saying, "Beloved, I beg you, as foreigners and pilgrims, to abstain from fleshly lusts which war against the soul." And the foreigners and pilgrims, the reference there, I think, is to the fact that they are foreigners now in their own country and pilgrims on their way to a different country, that being the kingdom of God. And he's telling them to steer away from those things, the fleshly lusts of this passage, of those things that have been so tempting for them in times past, and that were sort of in the wider culture all around them. And it's not so much that I'm interested in the temptation side or the fleshly lust side, but what he says is, abstain from these things which war against the soul, And I was struck by that, that we are now in a place where we are both foreigners and pilgrims. We don't know our land, and we know we're going someplace, but there are those things that are warring against our soul when we let them, when we allow ourselves to be sucked in to the negative news that's around us all the time. And I'm not saying that it isn't bad. We get sucked into sort of a negative outlook towards the future. I mean, those just war against our soul. And I'm really concerned when I talk to people about how that is affecting them, how the news around us is affecting us. And we find it so hard to turn off. We can't turn off the news. It's just keeping us going. And it becomes addictive, and that anything that's addictive is going to war against the soul. So I was worried about that. And then as I was reading this passage, I was reminded of another passage from the Hebrew scriptures, from the book of Jeremiah, that I know I've shared with folks, at least on one occasion, from the pulpit. And that passage Jeremiah is writing in this passage to the exiles, those people who are in Babylon, who've been taken away from everything that is familiar. They have no idea how long they're going to be in Babylon. The Babylonians are not their friends, right? They came in and destroyed Jerusalem, took the leadership, and transported them to the east hundreds of miles to a city where now they are living in exile. And so what do you do when you're in exile? The great psalm says, how do we sing the Lord's song in an alien soil? That wonderful psalm that's so evocative. How do we sing the Lord's song on this alien soil of what I'm calling COVID land? How do we sing the Lord's song here? And Jeremiah writes to the exiles, and he writes, "Thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, to all the exiles whom I have sent into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon." The instructions here: build houses and live in them, plant gardens and eat what they produce. Take wives and have sons and daughters. Take wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage that they may bear sons and daughters. Multiply there and do not decrease. But seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare. And the counsel that I get there is that when you find yourself in this alien land, especially for a time that you aren't certain how long it's going to last, it's not that great an idea to continually rail against it, say bad, 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 but to say life will go on. And Jeremiah is counseling, I think, those exiles to take that attitude. Life, it will go on. Take wives, have sons, build houses, plant gardens. We don't know how long we're going to be in COVID land. We don't know. But we can move forward in our daily lives, even in this sort of shelter in place or stay safer at home. We can move forward, and we will learn. We will learn. I'm not saying that we want to pray for the land that this kind of thing will continue. We certainly don't want to do that. We want it over as soon as possible. But while we're here, we cannot stop living. We cannot stop seeking the welfare of those who are around us. We cannot stop wearing masks when we go out. That is seeking the welfare of the land that we are in. We maintaining physical distancing. Those are all seeking the welfare of the land where we find ourselves, and making sure our children are brought up and have friends and all of those kinds of things. That's all part of what we are called to do. So those thoughts have just sort of consumed me today as I've been thinking about this, and also in anticipation of what I might hear from the office of the bishop. And I just want to close with a few words about what I heard. The projections that are coming out from the office of the bishop, and they're basing this on stuff that they're getting from CDC and other places, is that we're in this for the long haul. It's 12 to 18 months before things begin to look normal. And 12 to 18 months is a long time. We're talking about a phased re-entry. That's consistent with what the governor has said. Although, as pointed out in our conversation with the clergy, is the church, for the most part, will lag a couple of weeks behind what the governor has proposed, partly because we want to see if what the governor proposed actually had the hope for impact that is coming out of the governor's office. If it's not, then we're not going to change. we're going to sort of continue to seek the safety and well-being of our people. And then we were reminded that, of course, the governor has a different set of core values as a governor, maybe not as a human being, but as a governor. He has a different set of core values than we as the people of God have. The question of how do you overload or not overload hospitals is a question that civic leadership and state leadership is worrying about. The questions about overall economy, those are questions that are appropriate to the governor's office. They're not the same kinds of concerns that we as people of God have, and certainly not that we as the leaders in the church, those certainly coming from Denver, but also those of us who are in leadership roles in particular congregations. So we don't know. Things will change as time goes on. And what we might see happening in one congregation might not happen in another congregation just because the circumstances are a little different. But we will move forward with all due haste, but also all due diligence and due concern for everyone's health and well-being. It's not going to look the same when we emerge from this. Next Easter will not look the same as this last Easter, even if we are sort of back in the church, gathered together. It won't look the same. We may have a camera in there because we will have moved to offering virtual attendance as well. We just don't know. We just don't know. And that's the adventurous side of that. And if we can hold on to the adventure that God has set before us, I think that we will do well to keep from sliding into despair. So let's remember, that we are here together. We are learning what our strengths are, what really binds us together. And it's an amazing place. Good Shepherd is an amazing place. And we will come out of this different for sure. And that'll be a really wonderful thing to experience. I look forward to seeing you on Sunday. I'm so glad to be back.